Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, it is not a new revelation, but the rallying cry around the energy sector is still most certainly building and continues to show empirical signs that many of the aggregate number of jobs being created statewide on an annual basis are the result of the energy segment. Thank you again for joining us, and welcome to the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and with this growth comes some debate and some controversy. Issues like fracturing, the skills gap around advanced manufacturing and engineering, intergovernmental relations, and needed infrastructure investments. We will engage with leadership and experts in the energy business and begin in just a moment.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded March 15, 2013. On this week's program, Lynn Good of Duke Energy, Lou Green of the Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina, Richard Kizer of Santee Cooper, and Frank Yoho of Piedmont Natural Gas. Now, Chris William.
Hi, welcome to our program. Thank you again for watching, and welcome, gang. Lynn, I'm going to start with you because you're closest. There's nothing scientific about that. Lynn, we talk about the energy sector. We talk about alternative energy. We talk about the large ones like Duke. We talk about the co-ops. We talk about solar and wind. But when you back up and you zoom out on this whole business that we call energy, what is the single largest challenge to it?
This is an industry, as we'll talk about today, I'm sure, that's undergoing extraordinary change. So we'll talk about shale gas, we talk about renewables, new technologies, battery technology, all kinds of things that could change our business. At the same time, our load, which is the use of electricity, is not growing at the pace that it used to. So trying to figure out how to navigate this complex business with lots of capital to deploy and lots of decisions to make at the same time that you're not selling as much electricity as perhaps you were even 10 years ago, that makes it particularly challenging.
Yeah. Lou, same question.
Well, much of what she says there, she's facing a situation, as is Richard at Santee Cooper, with deciding how much power generation you're going to build. And you're not building it for next year or the next year. You're building for 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years out. Now, how do you make wise choices that will last that long? So that's not new to the energy industry, but it is significant, and even more so when the present day is a turbulent one.
Yeah, right. Frank?
What we see is, as we look to the long term in our business, with the discoveries of the shale natural gas supplies and the abundance of them, the world has changed very quickly. And when you tend to plan on a long horizon and you see changes coming at you very, very quickly, to be able to react, to make the decisions today that might change the course where you thought where you were going and to where you should go today. So those changes to things happening very quickly are very challenging in businesses that require a lot of capital to be deployed.
Is the velocity of change, Richard, has it happened quickly?
It is.
Yeah.
It's more change in this industry now, I think, than we've experienced in generations. It's happening fast. And I think what you were hearing over there was our biggest issue is planning. You know, how do you plan for the growth? What is the growth going to be? How do you plan for it? And we can't make a decision today and go implement it even a year from now if it's a new generation asset. You have to plan to get the permits. You have to get the permits, then you have to build it. So a decision we make today is going to be 5, 6, 7 years before we realize it.
You know, I want to bring up this whole idea that, the whole idea of change. Frank, you were talking before the program, and the cost of natural gas, who would have expected it would have been this low and stayed this low for so long? The alternative energy, I mean, this whole idea, Lynn, that has the industry advanced beyond what the regulatory structure is? In other words, is the regulatory structure, does reform need to come to the utility commissions in the Carolinas?
I think there's work to do, and our job as utilities is to educate them about the changes that are happening in our business. The way we charge for our product is by volume. And so you think about a situation where volumes aren't growing, there's a big fixed cost element to our business that needs to be addressed. And so I think that's something that is incumbent on all of us to engage with our regulators and the legislators to really give them a view of how our business is changing.
Do you think they get it? Do you think that you're out on the point of the spear on this with government relations sometimes? Do you think they get it?
By and large, I think they do. I think our legislators in South Carolina have taken a very measured approach to energy policy. I think they are deliberate and they don't rush into their decisions.
We also have to do what we can to help those regulators be where they need to be in terms of knowledge. Let me give you an example. In South Carolina, there was a time when public service commissioners, as they called them, in South Carolina, were chosen differently from the way they are today. The legislature went in and changed the way that was done so that they are now screened before they run for the Public Service Commission, in an effort to make sure that the candidates who are may be on the Public Service Commission are more capable and aware, knowledgeable of the industries that they are likely to regulate. So even those fundamental changes like that, which put good people into the pipeline, have made a difference. I would compliment the legislature and by extension then the PSC for changes like that.
You know, go ahead.
And I think the ongoing education, you think about, we live the business every day, and it's very complicated.
Sure.
We're in front of our commissions frequently, but not every day. So our responsibility is to keep them informed about what the changes are and how we can partner and be successful to provide the lowest cost possible energy for all of our customers, which is ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. That's what vitalizes the region. That's what brings economic development to the Carolinas.
Yeah, Frank.
It's been very interesting to see the power companies, the usage starting to level out with the residential customer. In the natural gas business, we've been seeing that a long time.
Now, tell me what that means.
Since 1970, the residential customer base in the U.S. has grown 70%. The total usage has stayed the same. More efficient equipment, better built homes. And so when you go through that, how do you deal with that as a business? It's very critical that your regulators understand the environment and you make changes to rate structures. So an educated and experienced regulator is a good regulator. You want them to be educated. You want them to understand the landscape to help you achieve what you need to achieve for your customers and also for your shareholders.
So let me stay with you, Frank, for a second. So in North Carolina, with a freshman governor, McCrory, and has outlined in his plan that that they are looking at a lot of these appointed commissions and a lot of these appointed boards, and they are taking a harder look at who should be on those, and it includes the North Carolina Utility Commission. Does this mean that we're going to have a different person now on that commission? And I don't mean just an absolute different person, but a different mindset.
We don't know. We think that, the North Carolina Commission, there's been a lot of talk, but they have a history of being ranked fairly favorably as commissions go in the U.S. I think there will be changes at the commission. There are always changes at the commission. I think coming out of the North Carolina legislature and out of Raleigh is it's going to be a person who has a balanced view. We've had that in the past, and our hope is as things change, we continue that in the future.
We've been very fortunate here in both North and South Carolina to have very constructive regulatory commissions who understand how to strike the balance between the utilities, the customers, the shareholders, and if we continue to do that well, I think that will help us migrate through this period of change.
Yeah. Let's look down the road a decade or 2 decades. And Lou, you made the point that this is long-term investment. as publicly traded companies, and maybe not the co-ops, but Santee Cooper is not publicly traded, but is certainly affected by public opinion. Duke is, Piedmont Natural Gas is. How do you, to your stakeholders, how do you make the case that, we're not doing so great this year, but we're really putting in place some things that are going to show up in 2021 or 2025?
I think they have to believe that because it's the kind of business we're in, long-term planning is just a part of it. And I mean, really, long-term planning. And from the cooperative's perspective, and I suppose we would claim to be a little different in this regard, in that our members, our consumers, are our owners. So we really only exist to provide them the most reliable and affordable power that we can get for them. So we come at the game with that single-mindedness that we'd like to think makes a difference in how they view how we work.
Mm-hmm. Richard?
Yeah, I think I think it's important to try to keep your customer informed about the decisions you're making. I think we reach out to our customers in a variety of ways, but there's a steady and serious analysis that goes into all of our decisions, whether or not it's to build new natural gas or new nuclear, and we have to get out and communicate that message because they are long-term decisions that will impact our customers for 20 and 30 and 40 years.
You bring up a good dynamic. You talk about, and I know you were working with SCANA on the new nuclear project between Columbia and Charlotte. Frank, you were talking about the price of natural gas. So when we've got these seminal events going on, cheap natural gas, some increased question around whether the product is really one you want to lean into. And let's stay with you on this, Richard. When you follow through on this nuclear project, how does the price of natural gas now affect the way that you strategically plan how you're going to deploy this new asset when it is approved and when it is up and running?
When we looked at evaluating our new nuclear station along with SCANA, you look at a variety of factors. You're not just looking at the cost of new nuclear. You're not just looking at the cost of one fuel source going forward. You're looking at a spectrum, and you're looking out over 40 or 50 years. And we didn't make that decision in 2006 on prices that were in place in 2006 any more than we would make them today on prices that are in place today. We have a good track record with nuclear, along with SCANA. SCANA's been a great partner, a great owner-operator. And it's baseload generation, it's emissions-free generation, it's clean generation, and we believe it's going to serve our customers well in the future. So
staying with the strategy idea, Lynn, when you're in the senior operating committee meetings at Duke Energy and you're again trying to look around the corner and plan, how does such a cheap resource like natural gas, how does that cause you to kind of tweak the plan a little bit? You backed off a little bit about the lead plant, about the nuclear plant, because natural gas is still cheap. So what do you do? How do you think?
So we're trying to accomplish the objectives that we've been talking about here, trying to make decisions that will stand up to decades. And so from our experience, diverse generation sources make sense. So we'd like to have a little bit of everything. We'd like to have some gas, we'd like to have some coal, we'd like to have nuclear, we'd like to have renewables. Because in our mind, that gives us flexibility. It also protects our customers from volatility that might arise in any given fuel source or commodity. And so we're trying to balance, how does gas look compared to a diverse fuel source? And in the Carolinas, we've added 2 combined cycle plants in the Duke territory,
Now,
3.
What is combined cycle?
It's a gas plant. 2 gas plants in the Duke territory, 3 in the Progress territory. For Duke, it's the first 2 gas plants that we've had in the history of the company, at least recent history. So it represents diversification for us. As we think about the future, though, we still think nuclear makes a lot of sense as a long-term resource, and we continue to pursue Lee as an option for the future.
So how does such an increase, and not just in Duke's territory, Progress territory, Frank, but how does this huge demand because of the cost of the natural or the raw material here, how does that change the way you plan?
Well, in the gas business, when I look at a nuclear plant being 10 years out, it is just very daunting. That sounds like just such a huge challenge, and I'm just amazed that they have to do this type of planning. Because in the natural gas business, we used to have that. For the next tranche of natural gases, you go to the deepwater Gulf of Mexico, which is years out. You construct import LNG facilities, take years to plan. With shale gas, a well can be drilled in 8 days, completed in several days. So the demand response time to the market in the natural gas business has really changed for us as an industry. So I think we're kind of adjusting to that because this is a new world for us. It really, in Pennsylvania, the Marcellus, really the mother lode when it comes to the shale gas supplies, it has really been developed and understood really in the past couple years. So being able to respond to supply and demand is very different because natural gas has somewhat of a bad history of volatility. This, I believe, will really put a lot of controls around that because of the demand response in bringing in supply to meet demand.
See, now there's a change that you were talking about change earlier. I would ask Frank, does he think that natural gas is going to level out, that it won't be as volatile as it was before? If it were to be, that might change the way utilities view it for long-term planning, if you could count on that. But the utilities will certainly stop and look back at 2006. We were talking before the program began, when it spiked to $13, $15, and then fell off the cliff there for a couple of years, came back up to, I mean, utilities can't make decisions if they're looking at a fuel source that lives like that, you know?
I do know. You know what, I want to come back to you, Frank, in just a minute, because we're going to talk about this whole idea of fracking now. It's legalized in North Carolina, but it's not approved yet, which we'll get to. Lou, let me stay with you for a second. Does South Carolina need to be better about their alternative energy policy? Solar, wind?
Well, I think South Carolina, like all states, needs to consider the possibilities for renewables. It's according to what kind of renewable you're talking about, whether it's a reasonable expectation to get a lot of energy from solar or wind. And when you were talking about the way utilities think about diversification, and Lynn was saying how important that was, I couldn't help but sit here and think, you know, when the conversation gets to the public, to the customer out there, oftentimes it gets focused on one or the other. We either want to get rid of all the coal because it has emissions, or we don't want to do renewables because they're expensive. Those are not the kinds of choices utilities make in any circumstance. They're talking about diversity, as she's describing. So, to your question about renewables, sure, we need to look at renewables, but we can't go but so fast with those until the price is right.
Which brings up that North Carolina did look hard, did set a renewable standard, and now that seems to be possibly in appeal process, or repeal, rather. Do you expect that that could be rolled back? It's 12.5% now?
12.5% by 2021.
Of your portfolio will need to be-
Of our portfolio, retail sales.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a complex topic. It's one that the first bill took a lot of work to get to consensus. We'd expect to stay engaged in this conversation as it moves through the legislature. But there are 26 or 28 states in the U.S. who have renewable standards. It's becoming more of a norm to introduce that diversification. And so our objective, as Lou indicated, is to stay engaged, but to look for the lowest cost options that we can put together for customers.
Yeah, Frank, how do you come down on that renewable? If they roll that back, what will that mean?
We believe that there should be a balanced portfolio with power generation. I don't think, while we love to sell as much gas as we can and move as much gas as we can, from a policy perspective, it does not make sense to go too far any one way. Now, North Carolina, the U.S. is about 25% gas-fired generation. So Duke Progress in North Carolina is moving up to somewhat of the portfolio that has been in the U.S. away from coal and into natural gas. So we do not really get into the renewables. They make sense long term. You want to do it if you can do it clean, and if you can do it cost effectively, you do it. But relative to just running away from them, I don't think that makes sense. And I think that we should, and really renewables and gas should be friends, because a lot of solar and wind, the reliability, it just is not there. The wind sometimes doesn't blow, and sometimes the sun doesn't shine. A coal plant, from my understanding, can't go start and stop real quick. A natural gas plant is a fairly good partner with the renewable to handle those times when they're not operating.
So Richard, when you sit here and you hear about this dialogue around renewables, I mean, do you think, what do you think? You feel compelled to have to do a renewable, or does a renewable really make sense for a company's portfolio?
I think that's a decision that each utility should be evaluating. I know Santee Cooper currently has some 28 megawatts of renewables on our system. Landfill gas, methane gas captured at landfill facilities. We have some purchase power contracts for biomass, burning biomass to create energy. But that's an analysis that we've done. I appreciate the way South Carolina has looked at it and not created a mandate. I think mandates create winners and losers in the electric industry. It's picking an energy source instead of letting the utilities do the analysis and have a diverse energy mix, as you mentioned, and get that diversity out there that best serves the customer. We don't need to be told which one to go build, which one we can or can't. We know how to do that analysis, and we'll figure it out.
You know, I need to shoehorn this in before we've got a few minutes left. Frank, let's go to this whole idea of fracking in North Carolina. You know, you hear very compelling arguments on both sides. Fracking is safe as it can be. We've been doing it for a long time. Fracking is, we don't know enough about fracking to say it's safe yet, says the other side. Tell us how you come down on this, and I think we know how you come down. But make your case on why you think it's safe enough for the old North State to forward this.
Fracking's been done for many, many, many years on millions of wells, and it can be done safe and it can be done responsible. What the state is doing makes a lot of sense. With the Energy and Mining Commission, what they're doing are setting out the rules, which will protect the environment, because when you frack, it can be done in a very environmentally responsible way. It keeps the community informed. And it also sets the rules, so if an investor wants to come in and invest in the state and bring jobs and brings tax revenue, they can. So they are just trying to set the stage, so if an investor wants to look at the state and drill and bring natural gas supplies to the state of North Carolina, they can, because right now they can't and the rules are unknown. So it makes sense what they're doing, but you can't let it go on forever. I know a lot of people pay a lot of attention to the jobs. If you go to Ohio and Pennsylvania, traditionally Rust Belt states.
What would it add? What kind of jobs, what kind of economic development would it add?
Nobody knows because nobody can go in there and do the work to find out what is there. You have a state like Pennsylvania and Ohio that has unemployment rates just north of 6% compared to North Carolina north of 9%. And a lot of that is around the development of the shale gas supplies. Now the Deep River play, which is around Lee, Chatham, Moore counties, I've seen anywhere from half a TCF to 30 TCF.
Now, tell us what that
That's
means.
a trillion cubic feet. Compare that to the Marcellus, which is 400 trillion cubic feet, and the state of North Carolina probably burns about half a TCF a year. So it's a modest amount, but it could be commercially developed. And what comes with that, and I think what has a lot of state capitals interested, is jobs and tax revenue. Yeah. It also brings gas supplies where you can have lower potential gas supply costs for your customers.
In the smartest guys and the gals in the room at Duke Energy, when you're thinking about this, how do you model this out? Because I know you're thinking about it. I mean, you've got to be thinking about that.
So whether the fracking occurs in North Carolina or whether it occurs elsewhere in the Marcellus, we're still buyers of natural gas, and the more supply, the lower the cost, which has been to the benefit of our customers. We've had an opportunity to pass through very low gas prices to our customers. So we think about it from that perspective, but we also think about it in terms of generation planning, which is what we've been talking about here. How does a low gas price gas plant compete with other forms of generation we might bring onto the system? Mm-hmm. And right now at these prices, it looks like the lowest cost alternative based on prices today. But we need to balance that with, the decades ahead and diversity and all the things we've been talking about.
To bring it home, what is that savings? We've calculated in North Carolina, since prices have come down since 2008, if they wouldn't have come down, it would have been over $1.6 billion a year more in energy costs to the state of North Carolina. How about a household? An average household on our system saves about $400 a year. So it's meaningful. In the U.S., it's put about over $120 billion a year back into the economy. It's beyond an energy impact. It's an economic impact in the U.S.
Well, and in a minute left, is if North Carolina does this, and North Carolina has the first mover advantage on this type of fracking and gas production, does South Carolina need to do something about this?
I'm not qualified to answer that question. I don't know whether we.
Good answer.
Well, I'm willing to admit I don't know whether we would have a need for fracking in South Carolina. It's just not my area of expertise.
Richard,
I would have to agree with Lou. I'm not sure that I've heard a whole lot of discussion on fracking in South Carolina and the opportunities that may or may not be there.
Lynn, would there be any, and I promise I'm not trying to back you in a corner on this, but, Duke Energy, would there be a play for Duke to, instead of buy it, why not buy the asset? And I'm not saying buy Piedmont Natural Gas, but well, you could announce that if you'd like.
Piedmont is a great supplier for us.
But wouldn't it make sense to look at the asset to produce it?
We continue to evaluate what's the right approach to secure gas over a long time period. We are the second largest user of natural gas in the utility industry. And so how do we lock in that supply? What do we do? Do we buy reserves? Do we buy infrastructure? Just a
Okay.
decision we're evaluating.
Great way to answer it, and I'm going to let you off the hook because we're out of time, but thank you.
Thank you.
Good to have you all here. Lou, nice to have you back. Lynn, good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, thank you for
Pleasure.
being here. And Frank, I can tell you're excited about that. Good.
Very
good luck with that. Thank you. Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris Woody, and we certainly hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.